Hello everyone. I'm happy to be here. So I wanted to read some books and I thought, what kind of nice children's books do I have? So I went downstairs on the bookshelf and I had a look. Here, this is an interesting book. It's in German. It's called the Struwwelpeter or Max and Moritz. These two children, they're very bad. One is called Max and the other Moritz. And this person up here with this curly hair is called the Struwwelpeter. And he did some very bad things, very naughty, and he got some long fingers. He wouldn't eat a soup. So that's a nice story. And then here we went to England and I found this story of a panda. It's called Zen Ghosts. Just look at the artwork. So that's just another child's book. Something small for the children. And I had another second book of this Werk Bartley. Yeah, and I found out the name of the word for their currency. That's Swiss francs. Yeah. And here. And this is actually in High German with Swiss. Let's see if there's something in there. Here's another one of those. Yeah. But this is just in High German. So it's pretty easy. I wanted to have one that was original in Swiss German and another in High German, just in case I couldn't make it. And this is from our town, Bad Oldesloe. Could also share something about our little town. There's some nice stories and pictures. Just opening the book, and I can already see the first thing is very interesting. This is one of the buildings right when you get to the downtown. I think that's Salinenstrasse. Yeah. And the old bridge. Yeah. Nice old buildings. But that would be interesting. And then here. This is where I used to live. That's where I was born. Cleveland, Ohio. So I wanted to teach my children a little bit about where I came from. And so I found on Amazon, what's so big about Cleveland, Ohio? But sadly, they're not so interested in Cleveland at all. But there's the stadium, the West Side Market. And this one, this is the best book ever. The Greatest Story from Oscar Wilde, The Selfish Giant. Yeah, that's the one I want to read now. This is a super, super sweet, sad book. I have to put these upstairs here, up above. Okay, so this is Oscar Wilde's The Selfish Giant by Fiona Waters. Again, I donated this to Emily. I wanted her to have it. To Emily Maureen Stein, August 7th, 2001. That's when she was born. May the magic in this book stay with you and live in your heart forever. Love, Mommy. Promise me that you will give this book to your firstborn child, with X's and O's. Can show you first the image, because it's not sure that I would take all the books with me, so I thought it's better to read them. If I give them away, I would still sort of have them on the internet. The garden was large and slightly wild. The deep lush grass was scattered with little white starry daisies, and bluebells and buttercups bloomed in all the corners. Butterflies sunned themselves on the carpets of flowers, and the thyme hummed with buzzing bees. In the spring, the 12 old peach trees were covered with pale pink blossoms, and later in the year the branches would bend to the ground, laden with delicious fruits. The air was filled with the sweetest of sounds, as the birds sang all day long. And then, in the evening, they would fall silent as the nightingale began her evening serenade. Every afternoon, the children used to creep into the garden on their way home from school. They would make daisy chains and play hide and seek in amongst the bushes. They lay on their backs in the grass and looked up and to the spreading branches of the trees, and they sang along with the birds. They all loved the garden, and the garden loved them. Imagine. Now this mean man's going to yell at them. Now the garden belonged to the giant. Long before any of the children could remember, he had gone off to Cornwall to visit his friend the ogre, and had somehow managed to stay there for 7 years. Eventually, they decided they had all said, "What have I done? Gone to Cornwall to visit the ogre and managed to stay for 7 years." Okay. Eventually, they decided they had said all they wanted to say to each other, and the giant took his leave, thanking the ogre for his hospitality. He strode back to the castle and discovered the children playing in his garden. "Who said you could come into my garden?" he roared in his deep, gruff voice. "How dare you disturb me with your noise?" The children were absolutely terrified, as the giant was so very big and his voice so very fierce. They all fled down the path and away as fast as their legs could carry them. "This is my garden, and I want it all to myself. No one else should be allowed to come in, especially not noisy children," the giant muttered to himself. The very next day he built a great high wall, a brick wall, all around the garden, so high no one could even see in, and he put up a notice that read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." And here you can see, there he is chasing all the children away, and they're all very frightened. So even the birds are leaving, right? I hate to say it, but I'm thinking of Donald Trump's wall right now. It's just a thought. So there you see the little children. Oh, we can't get in because of the wall is so high. Look at that big brown brick wall. And they're pushing on the bricks. We want in. We want to play in the blossoms and the trees. The children came skipping down the road after school, only to discover the dreadful wall. He's a fast builder, isn't he? They couldn't even catch a glimpse of the beautiful garden or hear the birds singing. Now they had nowhere to play. Their mother scolded them for getting in their way while they were busy. The roads outside the garden were high and dusty and full of sharp stones, and there were no butterflies. The children could only walk around and around the high wall, talking sadly about how happy they had been in the beautiful garden. The giant was a very selfish giant. But now what has happened? Now this giant is there in his house. Let's get some light. He's all, look at him. Where are the children? It's already winter. It's already cold. Time passed, and all the while the selfish giant's garden grew to be a sadder and sadder place. The birds no longer sang, and the flowers withered away. There were no blossoms on the peach trees that spring. Frost and snow lived there all the time. Snow covered everything with her deep cold blanket. Frost encased all the trees with her hard and bitter ice. Soon the north wind joined them, and he blew all day, sending icy drafts into the corners of the selfish giant's castle, and on his breath came hail, drumming on the rooftops. "Spring is very late this year," pondered the selfish giant as he sat gloomily by the window, looking out at his wasted garden. "I do hope the weather improves soon. I want to walk in the lush green grass and look at the bluebells and buttercups again." But winter never loosened his grip, and only the north wind and hail and snow and frost played in the garden that had once rung with merry shouts of the children. The selfish giant grew sad, but he did not remove his stern notice or take down the high brick wall. So, on the morning, as the selfish giant lay huddled in his great bed, trying to keep warm, he suddenly heard the most lovely music. It was so sweet and pure. He thought it the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, and he was sure the king's musicians must be marching by. He leapt out of bed, scattered rugs and blankets as he strode to open the window to hear the music better. But there was no great parade of courtiers, only a little brown bird, a singing linnet, on a branch of one of the peach trees. It was so long since he had heard a bird singing that he had forgotten how beautiful it could sound. A marvelous perfume came wafting in through the window, and the selfish giant cried out, "I do believe spring has finally come back." And he looked at his garden, and what do you think he saw? And here's a nice picture of him. Look at that. He's cuddled up there in his blanket, and he's thinking about that bird. So, turn the page. I like the curtain. Okay. He saw the most wonderful sight. Spring had indeed returned to his sad garden, and so had the children. They had found a small hole in the great high wall, and they had crept in like tiny mice. They were all sitting on the branches of the trees, and the trees were so delighted to have the children back that they were covered in gently dancing leaves and pale pink blossoms. Every tree had a laughing child in its branches, and the birds were swooping here, there, and everywhere in their delight. Of winter and hail and frost and snow and the bitter cold of the north wind there was no sign, except in the far corner. There was still snow piled up. The north wind was still huffing and puffing, and the tree that stood there was quite bare. No dancing leaves, no gentle blossoms, no birds singing. And as the selfish giant peered out of his window, he realized why. At the foot of the tree stood a little boy, who was too tiny to climb up onto a branch. The tree bent its branches as low as possible, but the boy was too small, and he looked out of the window. The selfish giant realized just how terribly selfish he had been, and how much he had missed the happy children, and the joy they had brought to his garden. He realized that it was his fault that spring had never returned to his garden, and he was truly sorry for what he had done. Now I can show you this. Here we are. Have a look at the artwork. And then here on this side as well. That's where it's still so very cold. There's the little boy. But he is a significant child. The story with the little boy intensifies. And this is the part that's so hard for me. I never can make it through this part. He ran down the winding stairs and straight out into the garden to help the little boy up into the branches of the winter-bound tree. But as soon as the children saw him, they turned and fled, because they were still very frightened of him. And as they ran, the garden turned to winter again. Only the little boy remained. His eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant as he had walked towards him. Now look at this. This is like my favorite page in this book. Look at how beautiful that is. I think he has got red hair too. He helps the little boy into the tree. Then on this side, you see it's so very cold. Let's find out why. Oh, it's so sweet. The giant bent down and very gently picked up the little boy and placed him high up into the branches of the tree. The tree burst into blossom, and the birds swooped down singing, and the little boy wrapped his tiny arms around the giant's great neck and kissed him. That's nice, isn't it? That's what I think every time I read this story. Oh, this is like the best. When the other children saw that the giant wasn't cross and grumpy anymore, they all came back into the garden It was a great rush, and with them came spring. The giant gathered, this is Oscar Wilde's work. The giant gathered the children around him and said, "It is your garden now, children. You must come and play here whenever you want. The garden will be full of love and laughter and happiness, and you are all very welcome." The giant then knocked down the great high brick wall and threw away the sign that said, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." All day long the children played, their happy shouts echoing around the garden. When their parents came looking for them anxiously in the evening, they found them all sitting with the giant in the most beautiful garden there had ever been, and the giant's face was wreathed in smiles. And the children came to say goodbye, promising to come again the next day. The giant asked them all, in turn, if they had seen the smallest boy. Remember the little boy who he helped into the tree? So he said, "Has anyone ever seen the little boy that he had helped into the tree? If you see him, please tell him, do come back with you." "I should so like to see him again," said the giant, but no one seemed to know him, and the giant was very sad, for he loved him the best. It's getting to the end, and it's very sad. So that's it, what he did. Such a strong man, isn't he? Yeah, this is a nice page. Look at this artwork. This is nice. There should be more light on that picture so you'd see better. From that time on, the children came every afternoon after school to play with the giants, to play in the giant's garden, and he was always there with them, joining in the games and the laughter, and the garden grew more and more beautiful. The children would make huge daisy chains to hang around the giant's neck and weave garlands of flowers around his enormous head. They would climb all over his long, long legs as he sat on the grass, and he would carry them around in the garden, high on his shoulders, where they felt they could touch the stars. For the giant, there was only one sadness. The little boy he loved never came again. He always asked the children if they had seen him, but the answer was always the same. No one ever knew him or where he lived, or indeed where he had come from. The giant longed to see him and would often speak of him. Oh wow, and now look. So wait, I have to make this light on here. Oops. So there he is in his rocking chair outside in the garden. He sits there with the children. And on this page, you can see more children. Yeah. Now I read the very sad words. Years passed, and the giant grew old, and his hair grew grey. His bones grew stiff, and he could no longer join in all the games. But he carried a huge armchair into the garden and would watch the children playing. There are many beautiful flowers in my garden, but the children are the most beautiful of all, he said. He was no longer called the selfish giant, and everyone loved him so very much. He watched the seasons changing, but never minded winter now, as he knew that spring would not be far behind. And it's getting worse, it's getting sadder. There's the little boy, do you see him? I have to stop thinking about how sad it is. Okay, I think I can do it. One cold, snowy day he looked out of the window onto his garden and rubbed his eyes in surprise. He knew his eyesight was failing. This is so hard to read. But it looked to him as if a corner of the garden had blossoms on the trees. He clambered stiffly down the winding stairs and out into the garden. Strangely, he hadn't seemed to feel the cold, although there was snow on the ground and the wind was icy. He walked slowly across the grass. His eyes were not deceiving him. In the farthest corner, one of the old peach trees was covered in glorious white blossoms. The leaves were golden, and the heavy silver fruit hung down from the branches. But the most wondrous of all, underneath the tree, stood his little friend. It's not so difficult, right? It's not so difficult. But from the most wondrous of all, underneath the tree stood his little friend, the boy he had helped into the very same tree all those years ago. He helped this boy all those years ago. The giant spread his arms wide and came close to the child. But then he stopped in great anger, for he saw the child had 2 wounds on the palms of his hands and 2 on his little feet, and they were prints of nails. So I think it's clear who this child is. So that's Oscar Wilde was such a good writer, wasn't he? I didn't show the other page. It's his big butt. With the, I think it's a cherry tree or a peach tree. It's a peach tree. Oh, it gets very sad now. "Who has dared to do this to you?" the giant rumbled. "Tell me, and I will slay him with my great axe. Who has dared to harm you?" But the child just smiled at the great angry giant and said, "Do not be angry, dear giant. These are the wounds of love." The giant fell to his knees as he looked at the radiant child. "Who are you?" he murmured, as he felt a great sense of awe coming over him. The child just smiled again and laid his small hand with the ugly wound on the giant's shoulder. "A long time ago you let me play in your garden. Now I have come to take you to my garden. Which is called paradise. And when the children ran into the garden that afternoon, they found their dear friend, the giant, lying dead under the tree, all covered in white blossoms, with a gentle smile on his old face. And this is very sad. So I think at the end, the giant, he knew love. He learned to love. And he had first been misguided, I think, and didn't like children. But then in the end, he did. So then, look, I have this. It's a very nice thing, isn't it? It's wood. It's a little zebra. Yeah. And this is also cute. This will help me stop being sad. And then start to look here. It's got Tyler's name on it. Tyler. This I got in Wales. Yeah, it's very nice. But I can't bring everything with me, so I'll have to leave it here with all the other stuff. And probably also that book. Or maybe Emily, when she stays here, she'll keep everything. Life is so funny, isn't it? We always change and change our lives. So here's a journal that I write in all of the time. I love that story. So, and I'm glad that I shared it. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to read it without being a little bit sad. But that's how it is. I never can get through the book. It's like my weakest book I have ever read. But that's a nice thing too, I think. So, Oscar Wilde. He's also a cousin too. So, there's that. Then I shall say goodbye. And hopefully you enjoyed it.